Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin, and due to a tech catastrophe, we have called in the big guns. We have called in Ben Byrne to co-host this week. Ben, thank you for coming on, I think, for the second time to the Eldritch Lorecast.
The Eldritch Lorecast?
Yes,
this is more than my second time to the Eldritch Lorecast.
That's true. How about Mastering Dungeons instead?
That is my second time, and it is an honor to once again be here on the, in more ways than one, second best tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms.
This is true. So for those who might have missed you the last time you were here or don't realize that I do the Eldritch Lorecast with you,
sure.
Could you tell folks sort of your background and what you do in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Ben. I co-host the Eldritch Lorecast with Shawn each week, which is the Ghostfire Gaming's official weekly tabletop RPG news and game design podcast. I'm also the creative content director at Ghostfire Gaming, which mostly pertains to Grimhollow, our dark fantasy IP, which is kind of my wheelhouse. And I've been a pro game master before that. I've done writing. I've been an actor. I've been many things throughout my life.
And one of the things you are is the host of one of the best 10 podcasts that aren't actual plays, according to Dungeons and Dragons fanatics. I saw this weekend and I couldn't wait to share it with you because it was, sure enough, our website, dungeonsanddragonsfan.com, had a 10 best podcast, D&D podcasts that aren't actual plays. And I thought, oh, what are the chances? So I start scrolling down and I went, started number 10. Some great podcasts on here, by the way. The Dungeon Cast, Total Party Thrill, Dungeon Masters Block, Dungeons and Dragons Lorecast, Three Black Halflings, Dungeon Master of None, Morris's Unofficial Tabletop RPG Talk. And that was the top 7. And I'm like, oh, there's 3 left. I'm like, wait, I wonder if we made the list. And sure enough, the next one was the Eldritch Lorecast. I was like, yay, that's great. It's the number 3 or number 1, depending on how you cut it. Podcast in all the realms. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I slowly, dragged it out and I slowly scrolled down. It's like, oh, Mastering Dungeons is there. Awesome. And I'm like, oh, I know what number 1's going to be then, of course.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was Mike Shea and the Lazy RPG podcast. And but it was so fun to see us amongst all of those wonderful podcasts out there.
I agree completely. It's really nice getting included on a list like this, especially because doing the Lorecast for as long as we have, it's been about 3 years now, I think, that we've been doing it, 3 and a bit. It's nice just to feel like you're not creating content into the void. And being included on a list like this, it's a small thing, but it really makes me feel like, and hopefully the rest of the Lorecast crew and Mastering Dungeons and everybody else who's on that list, feel part of a bigger community than just their little corner of the internet, So it makes us feel really appreciated.
Yeah, and I'd heard of every single one of those other podcasts for years now, most of them. And it's great that they're still around, even that there's still a community out there that listens to D&D and RPG talk, and isn't all just actual plays that people are flocking to. There's still some longevity in this industry, I think.
I also think that podcasts are part of the culture. Like, I listen to a lot of video game podcasts. They're part of the culture of a given hobby, but they're also something you can do to engage with your hobby even when you're not engaging in that hobby. You can get kind of the feeling of being at the table or thinking about game design by listening to a podcast when you're on the bus or at work or doing the dishes or whatever it is. So I'm glad also that there's such an illustrious list there for people to pick and choose from and cross-pollinate with.
Cool. And speaking of great communities, we have a community that talks to us via all of the social media sites or email or YouTube. And we have a couple questions that I want to touch base with this episode, especially to hear from you, Ben, about your thoughts on this, starting with Bram Baker via Patreon. And you'll love the intro here. Hi, makers of the second best TTRPG podcast in the realms. So playing at a con yesterday made me think about low-level play and creative actions in D&D. What do you think about the effects of creative actions, swinging from a chandelier, pushing over a bookcase, being viable at low level, and their effectiveness not keeping up with the spells or features of higher level characters? In my experience, at low level, players can more easily do creative actions because they are easy to come up with and imagine the results. At lower levels, people also like to use them because those actions often have bigger effects without costing their sparse resources. At high level, though, this changes. It's harder to find creative solutions when you're in the far realms, and they can't figure out if it's better to try and tug on a tentacle or just cast Disintegrate. Do you think my assumption is right? How do you inspire players to take creative actions, and how do you keep those possible and interesting at higher levels? Have you had any thoughts about this in your DMing, playing, or design career?
I definitely have, but reading ahead a little bit, Shawn, I've had a sneak peek of your answer. I'd kind of like to hear you speak first because I think some of what I'm going to say might feed into some of your thoughts on the topic.
Awesome. Yes. So this is a great question that plagues so many GMs and doesn't plague enough game designers. So the reason I say this is because the first question I'm going to ask is the game that you're making or is the game that you're playing supportive of these sort of off-brand ways to deal with problems? Many games do, in fact, support you thinking outside the box. So if you look at a game like Fate or Fate Accelerated, there is game mechanical solutions to this problem. Fate has 4 actions you can take. You can try to attack, defend. You can try to overcome, which is if there's an obstacle in your way, you try to overcome it, or create an advantage. And create an advantage is literally made for something like this. You are trying to do something that puts yourself in a favorable position for something going on later. So you could create the advantage of swinging from a chandelier. You could create the advantage of dangerously tippy bookshelf, which sets you up not only to use that at some point, but to get an extra boost. Well, I shouldn't use the word boost because that's an official game term, but to give you a significant advantage later as you use that aspect. So the game does it. And in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, you could make a move for your game called Do Fancy Stuff and literally say, okay, I'm going to do fancy stuff. I'm going to swing from the chandelier. I'm going to try to do this cool tactical thing. And then you can set consequences for it, for a success, for a failure, or for a success with a consequence or a hard choice. D&D doesn't do that. And it doesn't do it on purpose, I think, which to its detriment or to its favor is just the way the game is.
Yeah, and that's been my experience as well, trying to GM 5th edition for people who want to do creative things even at low levels, is understanding what they expect the result of their cool thing to be, and then trying to adjudicate for that feels bound within the reality of the shared game that you're telling or the shared story that you're telling, but also still accomplishes something. And I found this can be difficult with 5th edition. I remember playing a game with Dante, actually, who's the sound engineer for the Lorecast. And Dante's a really creative player, I found, in terms of wanting to do those cool things. Like, never just attack, find something cool to do. And they wanted to. There was a battle in a room with a dummy, it was like a combat training room. And he described how his character was going to get between the wall and the dummy and try and push the dummy with his legs at the monster, which I think was a ghost or something. And I just couldn't imagine how that was going to be effective. That's not calling Dante out at all, but it's just kind of like I couldn't see what was in his head about how to make this do the thing he wanted to do in game. And so there was a weird disconnect where the rules weren't supporting it or giving me an avenue to make that thing cool. But also, I didn't want to just like well, the dummy falls to the floor and nothing happens. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it can be difficult to find that in between.
Right. And so that's why in certain editions and in the 2024 book, there is a chart, or 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide specifically, there's a
Sure.
chart that's like damage by level or damage. I forgot exactly what it's called, but it's like at these levels, here is something that you could do that is in the roughly the right damage range, either as like nuisance damage or as real significant damage. And games that have a chart like that, you can say, yes, okay, you can do that with your action. You're not going to get to do your regular sword attack, but let's say your regular sword attack would be a D6 plus a D4 plus 3. So we'll just say if you hit, we'll do a D12 plus 3. So it gives that swingy range of damage, but it doesn't waste the action if you fail. Or if you succeed, it's not wasting the action. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the difficult thing in 5e specifically, and probably other games as well that are kind of combat heavy and you know have a level of crunch to them that aren't just kind of like let's invent a scene together. Is that sometimes it's just better to attack with your action, and so how do you make creative things better than just attacking with your action?
Right. Yeah, and I love to do things like that. I love to say, all right, you do that. Give me a strength check and I'll oppose it by the acrobatics check of the monster. And if you hit, this is the damage, plus this is the condition. It will fall prone. It will gain the prone condition. But if you fail, but if you fail, or if it succeeds on its check, we'll say you slipped and now you have the prone condition.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I love to do things like that, but you have to hope that the player who's doing the action is either A, willing to be more specific in what they want to accomplish, so you can have that dialogue in a useful but also efficient manner, or B, that they're not just trying to power game their way through something, where they're not doing it because it's cool and fun. They're doing it because they're trying to do 5 times more damage or 5 times more success at whatever they're trying than they could otherwise.
Yeah, I think you've provided a pretty good answer there in terms of like, if you want to knock the creature prone, but you want to do another thing as well in this swashbuckly action that you're taking, how you balance that within the game and providing a bigger consequence for failure, I think is a good answer to that. And the other thing that you sort of touched on there a little bit in my brain is, players sometimes wanting to do the cool thing and trick the GM a little bit. They're like, I do this. You didn't see that coming, did you, GM? But the problem with that is it creates that misalignment of expectation if the GM doesn't know what you are trying to accomplish, you know?
Right. Yeah. And that's why it's important to say, I'm doing this and this is my hopeful outcome.
Yes.
And then you can begin that conversation of, yeah, that's cool. Or no, how about this instead, as a consequence for success or failure?
Sure.
Great question. And we'll follow up with another one from Kurt Ugel 4576 via YouTube. Do you have any DM advice for spreading your attention across players, including when characters don't take hooks, don't step up to get involved, or just leave a scene? RPG games are exercises in derailment. I love that phrase. And some players are too nice with the spotlight or may miss cues and opportunities, especially when they have a specific idea what the start of a planned action looks like. This can lead to a feeling of being overlooked as the game moves on. So this is sort of how do you handle players of different types or when they're not engaged? And you have been a professional game master, Ben. So do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I'm usually, and I don't know if we use this term here on this podcast because it's a divisive term, but I'm usually a Matt Mercer effect apologist in terms of like wanting to run your game like Matt does on Critical Role or any actual play person. But I think one of the big crimes that they have inflicted on the RPG world is this idea of like solo scenes where one character is just having this highly emotional scene that just goes on and on and on and on, and all the other players are just expected to sit there at the table and watch through this and do nothing. And as a player, I've found that very frustrating in the past, where I've been like, well, I would like to be involved in this scene, or at least I would like to play the game a bit, that would be nice.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think as a GM, I have learned from experiencing that as a player, but also when I was a professional GM and being conscious that everybody at the table is paying for my time, and so they all deserve kind of at least a level of equal opportunity across a campaign to play. A GM can kind of sometimes become a theater director, where you have to, or a podcast host, or a talk show host, where you have to be actively aware of who's been talking the most at the table, and if someone has been quiet, asking them, not waiting for them to ask a question, but asking them a question. What is your character doing at this very moment? And if the players do split, if the characters split apart and go into different scenes or whatever, montaging those scenes together like a soap opera does, where you're kind of cutting back and forth between scenes so that there isn't 40 minutes spent on one or two characters, but you're kind of jumping between scenes 5 to 10 minutes at a time to ensure that everybody's kind of getting spotlit at different times, and actively doing that yourself as the GM, not just waiting for a gap in the play or something like that.
Yeah. Part of this is also recognizing player types.
Sure,
and knowing what kind of attention a player wants, and then being able to give them that specific attention, not just to please them, but to keep the game flowing. So there will be players that want to be the driver of what happens. And some players may just not. They may just want to sort of be entertained and see the story presented to them and don't really want to get into their character. And if you can, either through your experience with the players or just your experience with players in general, or because you've talked about it beforehand, if you can pick up on those player types, you can make people feel engaged with the game, even if they're not engaged all the time with all the play. So if there's one, if I need to move the game along, I'm going to go to the instigator and I'm going to look at the instigator and say, what does the party do? Or what do you do? Because I know they're not going to hem and haw. They're going to, I do this because this is what an instigator does. And while that instigator is instigating, I may then look at the role player and say, Cassandra, the barbarian, just went up and punched the horse. How does that make you feel? Right. And we'll let the role player, we'll let the character actor tell how they feel, the storyteller. Oh, it's traumatic to me because I had a pet horse as a youngster. Right. And so we let them do their thing in the spotlight that they want to do. They don't want to make the decision for the party. They want to internalize the action. And then we have the actor, then I say, oh, the guards come running. They all have their swords drawn. What do you do, actor? Show me. And the actor stands up and, does their thespian thing. And everyone is getting the action they want. And if you can do that, then you are running a game where everyone is not only getting the attention, but they're getting the attention they want. But if you don't know, you can also just basically do initiative, but just not for combat. Everybody, everybody, I'm going to go around the table. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Okay, I've been on you too long. I'm going to go to you. Just move around the table. One thing I've done with a certain group is give them tokens that they can turn over. So after they've had a significant amount of time in the spotlight, they turn their token over. And as I go around the table, I'm looking who doesn't have their token turned over. Then I will not go back to that person until everyone has their token turned over, and then we reset and do it all again.
Sure. Yeah. One thing I tend to also do within this kind of topic is some tables I've found and some players can be really antsy about your character's not there, so you don't get to contribute, even if the player has an idea of something that could happen in the scene or something that they want to say. An interrogation is happening in a locked room with two characters, and one character's outside and thought of a great question, but they're not, quote unquote, in the scene. And this kind of goes for also characters with low intelligence, but the player really likes participating in puzzles. And generally speaking, unless there's a real reason not to, like some dramatic irony about something the player outside knows that the players inside don't know yet, like there's a bomb under the table or, that sort of thing, I will generally let players participate at least, or give suggestions, even if they're not fully participating, in scenes that their characters aren't in, if that lets them participate in the game a little bit more and the group storytelling a little bit more. I'm not that, antsy about that.
Yeah. That happens all the time, even with characters with low charisma, with players that want to be the party face, right? They're the instigator player. So they're the one that's always trying to interact. They give the dramatic speech, and then you say, okay, well, give me a persuasion check. And they're like, can the bard do it instead? No, the bard can't do it because you were the one speaking. But maybe in the future, you let the player who is going to have the high charisma take the lead, and you interject.
Sure.
To get your instigation on.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like that's something that my group that I play with weekly has kind of calcified into, is like 3 years ago, everybody used to just throw themselves into social encounters, no worries. And more recently, they've become a little bit more reluctant to do that and just be like, well, I'm not the face. Let this person do all the talking because they've got the high charisma. But
right. Yeah, and often I will do that. I will let the low charisma instigator player do their thing, and then when it goes, I will say, "All right, so what do you say, Bard? You're going to be the one making the check. You don't have to act it out. Just what do you say?" And generally, they'll just parrot what the other player has said, but at least they are interacting with the game, and the wheels in their head are at least turning, and they're understanding what's happening at the table. So thank you for those questions, and we will have more questions next week. But now let's jump into our news and commentary section. We are going to start with an update on the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League. We covered maybe a month ago, that they put out an update for D&D Adventurers League after the Player's Handbook came out, which talked about how they were going to handle the new rules coming out. And a lot of it was pretty much common sense. If there's a new rule, use the new rule. You have a month or so to update your character with the new rules. But now that the Dungeon Master's Guide has come out, some additional instruction has been added to that article. What was covered in it? Well, let me tell you. First was how magic items are to be used. And it's along the lines of the Player's Handbook rules, which are, if you have a magic item and it's listed in the new DMG, you use the magic item from the new DMG. You cannot, though, rebuild treasure to make it fit something that's not in the DMG, if that makes sense. And if you have an item that wasn't an artifact, but now it is, that item is no longer available to you. But what you can do instead is replace it with a plain magic item that fits the scope of what it was. So if you had an armor artifact, you get +3 armor. If you had a shield artifact, you have a +3 shield. If it was a weapon, you just get a +3 weapon of that particular type. Makes sense so far, Ben?
It does.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the artifact. For creating backgrounds, there is a new creating a background section in chapter 3 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And so now you can create your own background based on those rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide chapter 3. The Greyhawk setting is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, as we know. They are not going to set any Adventurers League community-created content in Greyhawk at this time. So no Greyhawk-based Adventurers League content, but they did say that they will have more to share on this topic before the end of the year, which is rapidly approaching. So it sounds like there's going to be some news about that coming out.
Yeah, does that, on the Lorecast, we love to just baselessly speculate all the time. Does that suggest anything to you about their plans for Greyhawk, whether it's going to live beyond just being the sample world in this DMG?
I think that that's a good bet, because otherwise they probably just would have said nothing. They would have said, Greyhawk,
Sure.
you can put Greyhawk material on the DM's Guild. You just can't put Adventurers League legal content on the DM's Guild. But this line about we will have more to share on this before the end of the year tells me that there must be plans of some sort, or they probably wouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
And the biggest section of the update for the Adventurers League is Bastion guidance, which is interesting because it says that Bastions are available for player use. So like, okay, cool. All characters starting at level 5 may begin to build a bastion and begin with one cramped and one roomy facility. It reminds me of college. And I've been in my room and now I'm in the gym.
Yeah.
But the first thing I read that and I was like, okay, where you put your participles, your prepositional phrases is important. Because at first I thought it said all characters that start at level 5. And I was like, what about characters that start at level 1? Can they not have? And I'm like, oh, they mean starting at level 5, comma, all characters may begin. I'm like, oh, okay. So my editor brain went into overdrive. And then there is a sort of a big, long couple of sections about how to build your bastion, what it means. I'm not going to go into those right now because I don't know enough about bastions to have a strong opinion on it. But I think we're going to talk about it on the Lorecast later.
Yeah.
So I'm going to save my thoughts for that.
Well, I literally read the Bastion section of the DMG last night, or about 7 a.m. this morning US time, if you will. And I apropos of nothing, and I'll maybe save detailed thoughts for the Lorecast as well. Little trailer there for you, sneak plug. But I like them. I like the Bastion system. I think it's going to be cool. I think it's going to be fun. I'm however it pans out, great or terrible, I'm excited to use it. I'm not sure how it functions. It's kind of funny. You just said you don't know enough about Bastions to be able to comment on this. I feel like I don't know enough about Adventurers League to be able to comment on this, because I'm not sure how they would function in AL, because several benefits of having a Bastion and several of the facilities require you to be in the Bastion to be able to use them, which I don't think you ever are in an Adventurers League campaign, because you're always off adventuring every session. So
right, and that's the thing where right now I don't know what Adventurers League is. I don't know if it's just this big umbrella that all this content is setting under that has no real coherence. Because there have been systems like the Bastion system or like downtime use where there's a very specific formula to use. So for every adventure you play, you get a certain number of downtime days where you're assumed to be doing something, and you can do something with that downtime. And the Bastion system could be slid right into that, I assume, because with the Bastion system, you do things with your Bastion, or you can do things with your Bastion. So it could work, but the question is how often and how much and what sorts of shenanigans can players get up to by, well, I don't know, the alchemist lab in my Bastion, and I'm making hundreds of potions in my downtime. I don't know if that's possible. I haven't looked yet, but that's the sort of thing that we need to look out for in a organized play campaign, where there is obviously one thing that is just what everyone would do, and it ends up making the whole campaign a little off kilter.
I've absolutely no doubt there's going to be ways to do things like that with bastions. I know that you can craft common and uncommon magic items in your bastion. You can create potions, I believe. You can train yourself in a certain skill set that allows you to do like an extra 1d4 with your unarmed attacks for like forever until you retrain that in your bastion. Just little things. I think a lot of the benefits that bastions provide are relatively small, some of them to the point of being like, I don't think they're going to have that much impact on a campaign, especially as you go higher level. And it's kind of funny that you only get them till level 5, because some of these features I'm like, past level 5, that's not going to matter. Advantage on a history check if you're in your bastion. Woohoo. There's so many ways to get advantage on a check. Who cares? But the way that it's kind of structured, to my understanding, is to craft those magic items, 7 days in game have to pass, or it might not always be 7. It might be like a different number of days depending on the complexity of the item or the sort of training you want to do. So my question is, in Adventurers League, how many in-game days are assumed to have passed between Winter Fantasy and Gen Con, the next time you get to play? So
and generally it's just a set number. You say after an adventure you have blank number of downtime days to spend. And so that's why I don't know what's coming. I don't know if there's anything special in the works for Adventurers League with the new 2024 rules. So it's guidance that's lacking a frame at this point, as far as I can tell, because the frame of this campaign will be everything. Our bastion's going to be super important in terms of what characters can do, and not just like mechanically, not just making things, but story-wise. And we talked about that, I think, before on the Lorecast. If this bastion system was made without a frame of reference for how it can be used in a specific kind of campaign, then it's sort of throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping it sticks. And it may just fall down and it may stick forever. And we don't know what the expectation is for it and how it affects a campaign.
Sure.
So you can find on D&D Beyond that updated post with a link in the show notes. A little special note came to me that Magicon Chicago will be featuring Dungeons and Dragons. So Magicon is a Magic the Gathering convention that Wizards of the Coast oversees in Chicago. It takes place from February 21st to 23rd this year, and it's usually Magic only, but it looks like D&D will have a fairly large presence there based on this message. It takes place at the McCormick Place Lakeside Center in downtown Chicago. And if you go to that website that's linked in our show notes, it says, get ready to delve into Dungeons and Dragons at Magicon Chicago. Whether you're a veteran player or a recent fan, there's a D&D experience for everyone. More information on the D&D at Magicon Chicago will be available soon. And so having that prevalent on the front page of the Magicon website tells me that it's probably going to be something more than just a couple of learn to play tables running. Something must be in the works there. So we're keeping an eye on that. One more bit of news that I wanted to cover. Cobalt Press has a blog where they talk about what they make. And on November 12th, so a little over a week ago as of this recording, they put up a blog post comparing the 2024 DMG from Wizards of the Coast with its own Tales of the Valiant Dungeon Master's Guide. And they had done this previously with their player's handbook, just sort of talking about what one does and what the other does. Well, this one, to put it bluntly, I don't know if you have this term in Australia, Bush League.
No, but go on. I'm fascinated.
It's sort of like Bush League is sort of like low rent, sort of down and dirty, a little bit. Like if you're playing a sport and you while the ref's not looking, you go up and you elbow your opponent in the face. That's like Bush League, right? It's like, be be a little more professional. And the people that I talked to, I didn't see this article, but a lot of people sent it to me and said, "Can you believe this?" And so when I read it, it was like, "Oh, okay, this is happening," and it was very much of a, yeah, we read the Watsu Wizards, the Wizards of the Coast DMG, and it's all right, but it's not great like ours is. Let us show you how great ours is compared to theirs, and it really rubbed a lot of people, even people that I know who aren't big fans of Wizards of the Coast in general, were like, yeah, that's not how you do that. And so it got to the point where a blog post, the blog post and the reaction to it prompted an apology from Cobalt Press on their blog. And part of it said this: "What we've taken away from your feedback is that you expect better from Cobalt Press. You're right. We're pleased that you think well of us and disappointed in ourselves for any loss of trust. That's a big deal to us. No matter our intent, the impact is more important. So moving forward, we are making these changes." And then they list 3. "We're going to lift others up instead of tearing them down. We're going to leave the opinionated reviews to others. And we will act with positivity and integrity, the positivity and integrity you've come to expect from Cobalt Press." And Celeste Konowich, who is the lead designer at Cobalt Press for Tales of the Valiant and that rule set, had her name on the article, but she asked for it to be removed. And she had a social media post that said, "Long story short, I didn't write this article as it's presented and have asked my name to be removed. I wish I'd removed it before I started getting hateful personal messages. Ooh. My morning is officially ruined by seeing the post for the first time," with sort of a sweaty smiley face. So even Celeste, who I know a bit, I've worked with, wonderful person, great designer, didn't want her name associated with this sort of thing. Did you get a chance to look at it at all?
I'm just skimming the article now, and I'm wondering whether the article has been edited or not, because it definitely takes a couple of swings at the Wizards of the Coast Dungeon Master's Guide for 2024. It doesn't seem like it's savaging it, but it seems like this book's for beginner GMs, but if you want the real stuff, you should check out what we're, making over here. But I don't know if that kind of, there's a lot of like, this is for beginner GMs, which is great. Da 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 da. I don't know if it, which is great, has been added to the article since to kind of soften the blows a bit, but
yeah, the tone is very snarky. The tone is very, it's always a tough line to walk when you want to discuss something, but you're also a designer or a creator, but you're in our space of wanting to talk about things, wanting to talk about rules, wanting to dissect them and analyze them. To do it professionally and never to do it by saying, "I'm so much better than you," or "I'm so much better than this." And this it stepped over the line a bit, and then it sort of repeatedly stepped over that line. And I have lost a lot of respect, I don't know who put this up at Cobalt Press, but I've lost a lot of respect for other people in the industry I know who publicly said, "This sucks and I'm better."
Yes.
With their blogs and so on. And so I'm glad that Cobalt Press was called out on it by their fans. I'm glad Celeste clarified that she was not the one who wrote the original, the article as it went up. And as a company that partners with Wizards of the Coast, who put stuff up on the DMs Guild, I'm glad they saw fit to make that statement.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, regardless, it's not classy, folks. It's not classy. I'm not out here taking swings at every other, D&D setting or every other supplement, every other third party. The only time I generally will talk about other third parties' products specifically is when I really like something. you know?
Yeah.
Because it's just, especially exactly as you just said, be like, we're great and we're great because of our opposition to X other thing is just not classy. You know, just be great on your own. You know, tell us why we should want your thing on its own merits rather than trying to, you know, bash something else.
Yep. And so we'll continue to watch books come out from both Wizards of the Coast and Cobalt Press. And maybe, you know, do a review, uplifting review.
Yeah, I mean, Mastering Dungeons is known for its detailed deep dives into Dungeon Master guides specifically. So maybe maybe some third-party comments will be, when I say third-party, I mean like, you know, non-aligned comments will be coming out.